Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition. We turned out a poem 421, A Charm Invests a Face. And of course the use of the word face will take us back immediately to poem 418, won't it? Now in some ways we're also back to poem 210 and the challenges of perception. Now, this is a fascinating little poem because I think Emily is having some great fun in a poem like this. I think she is making some observations that are both physical, and we might even have something to say about Emily's view of beauty itself, physical beauty and the like. But I think there's something more profound going on here, and the challenge of perception itself, and I think we'll try and find our way back all the way to Homer's Iliad, and a passage that it's very possible stands behind much of this poem itself. Our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've been able to work through our previous introductory set of comments as well as the poems that we've already studied. We just finished with poem 420. You'll know it as you know noon. If you have read all previous 420 poems, you'll be able to take this poem and set it into a certain kind of context that will work. I mean, we already mentioned 210 and 418, for example. Now, the question of this poem is really the question of the self. It's an ontological question, one of our big five, right? Epistemology, what you can know, ontology, who you are, psychology, the study of the individual mind, sociology, the study of the collective mind, and then, of course, finally, theodicy, the question of pain and suffering in the world. The ontological question, who is the real self? Now there's some interesting background information here. Otis Lord was interested in Emily and was asking for her attentions. A friend of actually Dickinson's father, actually kind of older, and was trying to court Dickinson, and Dickinson gave a very interesting answer in letter to 617. She said it this way, quote, "Don't you know you are happiest when I withhold and not confer? Don't you know that no is the wildest word we consign to language?" Now, I think this poem very much will play around in that world. Watch it. A charm invests a face imperfectly beheld. The lady dare not lift her veil for fear it be dispelled, but peers beyond her mesh, and wishes and denies, lest interview annul a want that image satisfies. Now, at the very physical level, of course, she is saying that a woman might have a veil that covers her face, and she isn't quite certain whether she wants to lift the veil and to in fact show whether in fact she is actually as beautiful as the supposed would-be lover might find her to be. In other words, there's a little bit of like uncertainty about lifting the veil, because what if he finds me not as physically attractive as maybe he imagines himself to be? Now, of course, we've got all kinds of fun stuff happening in Shakespeare's world. Think about Much Ado About Nothing and the way that play ends with, of course, marrying someone without seeing them behind that veil that's hiding. In fact, it actually is the lover after all. So I think Emily's playing around with some profound background stories here, but I think the story that matters most to her in this poem is the story of the end of Homer's Iliad. Now, we've given full lectures on this at learnstrong.net for those of you that want to run it to ground, but you will remember that Hector has taken the life of Achilles' best pal, Patroclus. For that, Hector must now meet Achilles in front of the walls of Troy. Andromache, the wife of Hector, has begged him not to do this. Please don't do this and ruin our lives. And obviously the young lad that they have fathered and mothered together. Andromache is weaving when the fight takes place, and at the moment that Hector falls, we made much of this, of course, in our discussion of Iliad 22. The veil does what? At the moment that Hector dies, the veil drops. And it becomes a symbol right? Of the truth of something. When the veil drops, we even use that word, that phrase sometimes even today. So notice, we'll begin with charm. Now that is an interesting word, charm, related to what? Certain suggestiveness of capacities of not just sexual but other kinds of attentiveness, attraction and the like. Notice the language here is both economics as well as legal. A charm invests a face, again back to poem 418, imperfectly beheld. In other words, you can't see it quite right. We commented on that 1 Corinthians 13, through a glass darkly seeing, right? The idea, you can't always make it out entirely. And of course, in this regards, this poem joins with the previous poem of 420 and the epistemological question of how can you actually know things, right? A charm invests a face imperfectly beheld, notice capitalized, the lady dare not lift her veil. Now, close readers of this poem, from Emily's time especially, would know that archangels, as reported from Isaiah 6:2, archangels, of course, their faces are covered, right? The lady dare not lift her veil. You'll remember 398 when we played the game of that poem. I had not minded walls where universe one rock, and far I heard his silver call the other side the block. I tunneled till my groove pushed sudden through to his, then my face take her recompense, the looking in his eyes. But 'tis a single hair, a filament, a law, a cobweb wove in adamant, a battlement of straw, a limit like the veil unto the lady's face. But every mesh, a citadel, and dragons in the crease. Notice, we'll get to this idea of mesh here in a second. The lady dare not lift her veil for fear it be dispelled. Think about the power of casting the spell versus dispel, right? But what does the lady do? Notice she takes the perspective of the lady, peers beyond her mesh. We're back again to poem 398 with mesh. And wishes, dash, and denies, dash. Notice this kind of this vacillation. One scholar has called it the vacillation between candor and coquetry. This idea of what, should I show really who I am, right? Lest interview, notice capitalized. In other words, actually showing, actually presenting one's face. Interview, annul a want. Again, we're back to the legal language, and we all know what it means to annul a marriage, right? Annul a want, that image satisfies. And the moment that we see this word image, we can't help but think of course, Plato's Republic, because that's the very word that gets used in Republic 7. Those are images, shadows on a wall. They're not real, they just look real. By the way, when we get to poem 558, we'll come back to this poem one more time. But little Caramine hath her face of emerald scant, her gown, her beauty is the love she doth, itself exhibit mine. What is actually going on in this poem at 2a? I think that she's saying the argument simply is actual love is sometimes less potent than the imagined loved ones. That is to say, things are not always what they appear to be. At 2b, I love the economic and the legal language of this poem. At 3a, consider the fact that Hawthorne played a similar game in his Minister's Black Veil, by the way, 1836, as well as his classic Birthmark. But I want to take us to T.S. Eliot and Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. What is it that he says every day we prepare a face to meet the faces that we meet? That notion that we're hiding things. And the fact that if we remove the veil, how would people respond? How would people actually understand us? There have been readers of this poem that say, this is Emily's challenge to decide whether she wants to really publish her stuff or not. Because if she were to step out of the shadows from behind the veil and actually try and publish her stuff and then claim it's hers, it could be problematic. What if they don't like my stuff? She'll say later here in a few poems, this is my letter to the world that never wrote to me. Judge tenderly of me is the way that poem is. Finally, at 3b, what was a time when you learned things are not always what they appear to be? That is to say, when the veil was lifted and you weren't very pleased with what you found. Thank you.